When the ticking of a clock controls a man's every action, can a life lived in the present reveal the peace he so desperately seeks? Nazareth was a village of rhythm. Each day moved in patterns of work and rest, and at its heart stood the ancient clock tower, a relic of stone and iron that told the hours with steady regularity. The villagers called it the Old Keeper, a name that spoke to the sense of guardianship it held over their lives. From the age of 12, Eliakim had been captivated by the Old Keeper. He was a quiet boy, one who found comfort in the order and predictability of time. While other children chased each other through the winding alleys and sunlit fields, Eliakim often stood alone in the square, staring up at the clock's face as its hands ticked forward. He found himself in awe of how it divided the day, how each hour was marked with such precise dedication. To him, the clock was more than a machine. It was a symbol of control, of mastery over life's chaotic elements. Eliakim's father, a hard-working craftsman, noticed his son's fascination and encouraged his interest. He even allowed Eliakim to help him in his workshop, where he repaired tools, harnesses, and even small timepieces. By the time he was 15, Eliakim was known in the village for his unusual sense of discipline and his keen attention to detail. People marveled at how well he planned each task, how he always knew exactly how much time to allot for each job. But as Eliakim grew older, he felt an odd emptiness within him. Though he believed that controlling time would grant him peace, there was a weight that pressed on his heart, a feeling that no matter how efficiently he lived, something essential was slipping away. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the hills, Eliakim heard a murmur passing through the village. A teacher from Galilee was speaking by the lake. The man's name was Jesus, and he had gained a reputation as a healer, a prophet, and a preacher. Eliakim had heard the tales, but he had never ventured to listen for himself. But something within him, a curiosity he rarely indulged, urged him to go. As Eliakim reached the lakeshore, he saw a crowd gathered around a man seated on a rock, his face gentle, his gaze steady. Jesus was speaking in parables, stories that seemed simple on the surface, yet resonated with a wisdom that touched the listeners' hearts. Eliakim stood at the back, watching and listening. Jesus' voice was calm, yet it held an undeniable authority. He spoke of sowing seeds, of tending to life with care and patience. Eliakim felt an unexpected calm wash over him, as if his mind, always calculating and planning, had found a brief respite. "Consider the lilies of the field," Jesus said, gesturing to the wildflowers growing nearby. "They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was clothed like one of these. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Eliakim felt a pang of longing as he listened. There was a part of him that wanted to understand this life of trust, this way of surrendering the future. But could he, a man who lived by the chimes of a clock, really let go? The next evening, Eliakim found himself returning to the lake, his heart pulling him back despite his own reluctance. He noticed Jesus sitting alone on the shore, the water reflecting the orange and pink hues of the setting sun. Mustering his courage, Eliakim approached him. "Teacher," Eliakim began, his voice tentative, "may I ask you something?" Jesus looked up at him, his eyes warm and inviting. "Of course," he replied, motioning for Eliakim to sit beside him on a smooth stone. Eliakim settled beside Jesus, his heart pounding with questions. He took a deep breath. I have spent my life trying to use every moment wisely, planning each day, every hour, down to the smallest detail. I thought that if I could master time, I would be at peace. But instead I feel weary. It feels like I am always chasing something, yet I never reach it." Jesus nodded, his gaze understanding. Many people believe that peace is something they must earn or achieve. But peace, Eliakim, is not found in grasping. It is found in surrendering. It is a gift, freely given, that can only be experienced by letting go. Eliakim's mind resisted the idea. But if we let go, won't life fall into disorder? Won't we lose the things we worked for? Jesus smiled gently. Do the stars in the sky labor to shine? Do the rivers force themselves to flow? There is a harmony in life that exists beyond our control, Eliakim. To surrender to it is not to abandon life, but to live fully within it. Eliakim felt a shiver run through him, as though Jesus' words had touched a place within him that had long been hidden. He was intrigued but uncertain. Part of him wanted to understand this way of living, to let go of his old ways, but another part clung stubbornly to the familiar. Despite his inner conflict, Eliakim began to spend more time with Jesus and his disciples. He observed their way of life, noticing how they moved through each day with a calmness that he could scarcely understand. Jesus seemed to walk with an inner peace, never hurried, always fully present with each person he encountered. One evening, Jesus invited Eliakim to join the disciples for a meal. As they sat around the fire, laughter and conversation flowed freely. Eliakim found himself relaxing, a small part of his rigid nature softening in the warmth of their camaraderie. He noticed how the disciples treated each other, not as competitors or as mere companions, but as brothers, each one valued for who they were, not for what they could accomplish. After the meal, as the stars twinkled overhead, Jesus turned to Eliakim and placed a hand on his shoulder. Eliakim, you are welcome among us. Will you walk with us for a time? Eliakim hesitated. The idea of leaving behind his structured life, his carefully planned days, filled him with both excitement and fear. Yet, as he looked into Jesus' eyes, he saw a depth of compassion and understanding that reassured him. Yes, Eliakim replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I will. The following days were unlike anything Eliakim had ever known. He traveled with Jesus and the disciples, learning to live without a rigid schedule. At first he found it unsettling, the lack of structure, the freedom to simply be. But slowly he began to adapt, finding a new rhythm that was less about control and more about presence. One afternoon, as they sat beneath an olive tree, Jesus shared a parable. There was once a man who spent his days counting his wealth, believing that if he had enough, he would be secure. But no matter how much he accumulated, he was never satisfied. Peace eluded him, slipping through his fingers like sand. Eliakim felt a pang of recognition. He had been like that man, counting not wealth, but moments, believing that by measuring each one, he could somehow hold on to life itself. As the days turned into weeks, Eliakim found himself changing. He noticed the beauty of each moment, the warmth of the sun, the laughter of children, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. His heart, once burdened by the need to control, began to open, embracing the simple joy of being alive. One evening, as they walked along the shore, Jesus placed a hand on Eliakim's shoulder. Do you feel the peace within you, Eliakim? He asked, his voice soft and filled with warmth. Eliakim nodded, a smile forming on his lips. Yes. For the first time I feel whole. Jesus smiled, his gaze gentle. This peace is always within you, Eliakim. It is not something that can be lost, for it is a part of who you are. Remember this, even when life becomes difficult. Their journey took them to Jerusalem, where tensions ran high. Eliakim felt the old worries creeping back, memories of his former life pressing on him. Fear threatened to overshadow the peace he had found, and he struggled to hold on to the lessons he had learned. One evening, as they gathered in an upper room, Jesus spoke of the trials that lay ahead. Eliakim's heart was heavy, fear tugging at the edges of his newfound peace. But Jesus looked at him, his gaze steady and compassionate. Remember, Eliakim, he said softly, peace is not found in the absence of trouble, but in the presence of trust. I am with you always. After Jesus' death and resurrection, Eliakim returned to Nazareth, carrying with him the teachings he had learned. He no longer lived by the ticking of the old keeper, but by a new rhythm, one that was rooted in trust and love. He spent his days helping others, sharing the peace he had found, and living fully in each moment. Eliakim had discovered the truth of Jesus' words. that life was not something to be measured or controlled, but a gift to be received. In living by a clock without hands, he had found a freedom that transcended time, a peace that was both within him and around him. And as he looked up at the old keeper, its hands ticking steadily onward, Eliakim smiled, knowing that he was free. Certainly. Here are 2 additional chapters that dive even deeper into Eliakim's personal growth and add complexity to his journey, showing him tested in his newfound peace and ultimately passing on his insights to others. After months of traveling with Jesus and the disciples, Eliakim returned to Nazareth. Walking through the familiar streets, he noticed how everything seemed different, yet unchanged. The stone houses, the bustling marketplace, and the old keeper, the clock that had once dominated his life, all stood just as they had when he left. People greeted him with surprised smiles, some with polite nods and a few with whispered questions. He could feel the curious stares, the murmurs about where he had been and what he had learned. He sensed that the villagers were unsure of the man who had returned to them, someone both familiar and yet transformed. The old keeper struck the hour, its chime echoing through the square, reminding Eliakim of his former life. As the sound faded, he was struck by the memory of how he used to live by its chimes, structuring each task and every moment to the beat of its ticking. But now the sound held no power over him. Instead of anxiety or urgency, he felt only a gentle awareness, a reminder of the journey he had taken. He made his way to his father's workshop, where he was greeted with a warm hug and the scent of freshly cut wood. His father studied him with a mixture of joy and curiosity. "You look different, my son," he said, his eyes softening. "There's a light in your eyes, a peace I haven't seen before." Eliakim smiled, humbled by his father's words. "I found something I didn't know I was searching for," he replied. "It's a kind of freedom, one that doesn't depend on schedules or the hours marked by a clock. I learned it from the teacher, from Jesus." His father's gaze grew thoughtful. "Is this why you no longer look to the old keeper with the same reverence?" Eliakim nodded, glancing out the window at the clock tower. "Yes. I've learned that peace doesn't come from controlling time, but from letting go, from living fully in the present. It's something I wish everyone could experience." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then perhaps you can teach them, Eliakim. Not with words but with the way you live." The idea stirred something within Eliakim. He knew he couldn't keep this newfound understanding to himself, that it was a gift meant to be shared. But he wondered how he could show others a peace that was beyond words, a life beyond the clock. The opportunity to share his newfound peace came sooner than Eliakim expected. The village had been bustling with preparations for a wedding, an event that brought families, friends, and travelers together in celebration. The bride's family was well regarded in Nazareth, and they invited nearly the whole village, including Eliakim. During the festivities, Eliakim was approached by an old friend named Isaac. They had grown up together, both bound by similar ambitions. But while Eliakim had discovered a new way of life, Isaac had only grown more focused on his work, his schedule, and his endless pursuit of control over every detail. "Eliakim," Isaac greeted him with a weary smile. "I've heard you've been traveling with a teacher from Galilee. They say you've changed, that you no longer care about the clock or planning every minute." He shook his head with a chuckle. "I can't imagine living like that." Eliakim studied his friend, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the lines etched into his forehead. He could see a mirror of his former self in Isaac, the burden of always chasing time, of feeling it slip away even as he tried to hold it. "I used to feel the same way," Eliakim replied. "I believed that if I could control every moment I would find peace. But the more I tried to hold on, the more life felt like sand slipping through my fingers." Isaac sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know that feeling. I work harder and harder, but it's never enough. There's always more to be done, more to achieve. And still I feel empty." Eliakim placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, his gaze compassionate. "Isaac, let me share something I learned from Jesus. He taught me that peace isn't something we achieve through effort or control. It's found in the simple act of surrender, in letting each moment come as it is. We don't have to measure or count it, just live it. Isaac looked at him, a mix of doubt and longing in his eyes. But what if things fall apart? What if we lose everything we've worked for? Peace isn't the absence of challenges, Eliakim replied softly. It's the presence of trust, a trust that no matter what comes, we are enough and each moment is enough. It's a life lived beyond the ticking of a clock, free from fear of what's to come or regret for what has passed. Isaac was silent, his face reflecting a struggle within. Finally he nodded, his expression softening. I'd like to understand this peace you speak of, Eliam. Maybe, just maybe, it's what I've been looking for all along. The wedding feast continued around them, but for Eliakim and Isaac, the noise faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. Eliakim felt a deep gratitude, knowing that his journey was not just his own, but one that could touch others, offering them the same freedom he had found. As they watched the celebration, the old keeper chimed in the distance, its sound mingling with the music and laughter. For Eliakim, the chime was no longer a reminder of fleeting time or things left undone, but a gentle song that marked each moment as a gift, a moment of life, of joy, of presence. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.